Arab executive buys an African woman at auction, but she's hiding a secret. He wasn't the kind of man who attended human auctions. Zayd al-Hakim was a multi-billionaire oil magnate, a powerful Arab executive whose empire stretched from Dubai to Dakar. But that night, deep in the underground halls of an illegal elite gathering, something drew him there. Among hundreds of broken souls on display like livestock, his eyes locked onto a young African woman, silent, proud, and unlike any he'd ever seen. Her name was Amelie, and there was something in her eyes, defiance, pain, mystery, that made him raise his hand and bid more than anyone had ever dared. He thought he was buying silence, obedience, a possession. But what he brought home was a woman with a past that could destroy his legacy, and a secret that would change his life forever. This is not just a story of power and secrets. It's a story of identity, redemption, and what happens when two worlds, meant to remain apart, collide with explosive consequences. If you believe in second chances, hidden truths, and love that grows where it's least expected, stay with me until the end. Zayd al-Hakim stepped out his matte black Maybach into the thick, hot air of the Mauritanian night. His security detail didn't follow. They knew better than to intrude. Where he was going tonight, beneath the surface of forgotten desert city, his power came not from money or titles, but from silence, presence, and a careful control of perception. A man like Zayd didn't belong in places like this. But then again, a man like Zayd could go anywhere he wanted. The so-called auction was held behind a crumbling colonial building, down 2 flights of stairs that led to a dimly lit chamber hidden from the eyes of the world. It smelled of sweat, blood, dust, and desperation, a place where humanity was peeled back to its rawest form. He walked past the guards, nodded once to the host, an older Lebanese broker in a white linen robe, and moved to the center of the gathering. Around him, other men sat in silence, their eyes glinting in the dark. Oil heirs, arms dealers, exiled royalty, men who played God in secret and preferred it that way. The stage was raised, plain, and ugly. The first woman brought out was maybe 30, trembling, eyes vacant. The bidding started fast, cruel. Zayd didn't blink. He wasn't here for flesh. He didn't even know why he had come. Then she stepped onto the platform. Young, no older than 25. Tall, slender but not fragile. Her skin was a deep, radiant mahogany. Her hair was coiled tightly against her head, and her posture, straight, regal, seemed to defy everything around her. No fear in her eyes. Only a slow, deliberate challenge. She didn't look at anyone until she looked at him. Their eyes locked. Zayd didn't believe in spiritual moments, but something cracked in him in that instant. Not love, not lust. Something older, primal, familiar, as if his soul had been waiting centuries for this collision. The announcer said her name was Amelie. No last name, no background, no story. She does not speak, the broker added casually. Mute, perhaps. We don't know. We tried. She hasn't said a single word. Zayd's stomach twisted slightly. There was too much silence in the world already. The bidding began. It started at $5,000. He raised his hand. Another man countered. Zayd raised again. 10,000. Another man laughed. 15. Zayd didn't hesitate. 50. A long silence fell over the room. The broker blinked. We have $50,000. Whispers filled the corners of the chamber. Sold. Amelie didn't flinch. She didn't bow her head. She didn't even glance back at the men who had leered at her seconds ago. She stepped down slowly and stood before Zayd with an unreadable face. She didn't smile. Neither did he. He turned and walked out, expecting her to follow. She did. They rode in silence back to his private villa on the edge of the desert, a sprawling compound made of sand-colored stone and glass, filled with priceless art and emptiness. No one said a word. Inside, he showed her to a private suite, nothing extravagant but respectful. Clean clothes, a soft bed, a shower, a door that locked from the inside. When he turned to leave, she did something that caught him off guard. She placed her hand gently on his wrist, just 2 fingers. No pressure. Her eyes met his again. She nodded slowly. Zayd didn't know what it meant. Gratitude? Trust? Warning? Then she stepped inside and the door clicked shut. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Zaid skipped his meetings in Casablanca and canceled a call with investors in Riyadh. He stayed in his villa, pacing the marble floors, replaying her stare in his mind over and over again. What had he done? He didn't buy women. He never had. He didn't even believe in that twisted market. But last night, something had pulled him to her, something he couldn't explain. Not attraction, though she was beautiful in a way that no diamond could outshine, but something deeper, something dangerous. Around noon, he knocked lightly on her door. No answer. He knocked again. "Emily," he said softly. Still no response. He opened the door slowly, respectfully. She was seated by the window, fully dressed, her hair tied in a loose braid. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were on the vast desert outside, where the dunes shimmered like gold in the sun. There was a journal in her lap, and in her hand a pen. She was writing. Zaid froze. He stepped closer. Her handwriting was elegant, clean, like it belonged to someone educated, even refined. When she saw him reading over her shoulder, she closed the book quickly and tucked it away. "I'm sorry," he said. She shook her head. Still no words. "Do you understand me?" She nodded once. "Emily," he said, "why haven't you spoken?" She just looked at him. Then, after a long pause, she turned toward the window again. He noticed a scar just below her right ear for the first time. Small, precise. Surgical? He sat down a few feet away, not pushing, just present. After 10 minutes of silence, she reached into a drawer and handed him a piece of paper. On it, a single sentence. "I lost my voice because I chose to protect someone else's." Zaid read it again and again, the words like thunder in his chest. She hadn't lost her voice. She had given it away. He looked at her, his mind spinning with questions he didn't know how to ask, and his heart suddenly unsure what story he had just stepped into. Zaid wasn't a man who waited for answers. In his world, everything had a price. Every door opened with the right key, every secret bent beneath the weight of power. But Amelie shattered that logic with a single piece of paper. "I lost my voice because I chose to protect someone else's." It haunted him. She had returned to silence after handing him the note. Not a word, not a glance. Just the quiet strength of her presence filling the villa, like a scent that couldn't be shaken off. Zaid couldn't work, couldn't think. The woman he brought home from the shadows of an auction now occupied his thoughts with terrifying intensity. That afternoon, he summoned his private physician, a discreet Algerian man named Dr. Youssef, who had treated princes in secret and once saved Zaid's life during a hunting accident in Oman. "I need you to examine someone," Zaid said carefully. "A woman. She hasn't spoken in a long time. I want to understand if it's physical or if it's something else." Dr. Youssef narrowed his eyes. "Is she willing?" Zaid paused. "I'll ask." He returned to her room. Knocked. Amelie opened the door. This time, she wore a white cotton tunic that made her skin glow like copper under the natural light. She stood tall, alert, and unmoved by his presence. "I brought someone," Zaid said gently. "A doctor, just to see if there's anything physical that's stopping you from speaking. But only if you agree." She didn't move. Then she stepped aside, allowing them in. Dr. Youssef greeted her with a warm nod. "May I check your throat?" he asked. Amelie hesitated, then nodded once. The examination was brief, clinical, professional. "No damage to the vocal cords," Youssef concluded, closing his case. "No sign of trauma to the larynx. She's healthy, strong. Her voice is there, but it's like a door she keeps locked." Zaid nodded slowly. "Thank you." When the doctor left, Amelie sat back down by the window, opened her journal, and began writing again. Her pen glided across the pages, as if it had somewhere to be. Zaid didn't leave. He stood there, watching her from a respectful distance. Finally, after a long silence, he said, "You don't owe me anything. Not answers. Not obedience. Not presence." She stopped writing. He took a breath. "But I want to understand." Amelie turned to a blank page. Slowly, she wrote, Understanding begins where judgment ends. He read the words and felt something collapse inside him. I'm not here to judge you, he said. She wrote again, then stop trying to fix me. That cut deeper than he expected. He had rescued people before, children, refugees, broken employees on the brink of ruin. Saving was second nature to Zaid. But this woman didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be seen. Zaid stepped out, leaving her to her world of ink and silence. That evening, he sat alone by the pool, watching the desert sky melt into fire. His assistant, Rami, called from the Dubai office. Contracts needed review. A UN delegation was requesting his appearance. And yet, he couldn't move. Everything that once mattered felt suddenly hollow. He barely slept. The next morning, he awoke to the scent of something unexpected. Cinnamon. In the kitchen, Emily stood barefoot, stirring a pot over the stove. She was humming. Not a song, but a simple rhythm, soft and slow. Her back was to him, her movements gentle but deliberate. He was speechless. She turned and noticed him. Didn't smile, but gave a slight nod. Then she placed 2 bowls on the counter. Porridge, spiced with something warm and unfamiliar. Zaid sat across from her, took a spoonful. It was incredible. They ate in silence. Afterward, he said, "Where did you learn to cook like that?" She looked down. Then she wrote, "My mother taught me before they came." Zaid swallowed hard. "Who came?" She didn't answer. Later that day, he instructed his team to find anything they could about her, but no name, no records, no passport. Just the one word they had from the auction, Emily, which in Zulu meant the beautiful one. Likely not even her real name, but it suited her, not just for her physical beauty, but for the strange grace she carried, even in silence. Her movements, her gaze, her restraint, they had weight. As days passed, Emily didn't speak, but she communicated in other ways. She tended the plants in the villa garden, restoring life to dead branches. She rearranged his cluttered study, leaving behind perfect order without disturbing a single paper's meaning. She walked barefoot on the terrace at dusk, the hem of her robe catching the breeze like a dance. One morning, Zaid returned from a call to find a page from her journal left on his desk. "Why did you buy me?" He stared at it for a long time. Then he picked up a pen and wrote beneath it, "Because I thought you were lost." He left the page on her nightstand. The next day it returned, under his words. She had written, "And now." Zaid sat on his bed for over an hour that night, staring at the ceiling. What now? Emily's presence was no longer that of a stranger. She was in his air, his blood, his mind, yet untouched, unclaimed, entirely herself. He wasn't sure what he wanted from her anymore. Affection? No, that would be too easy. Answers? Maybe, but mostly he wanted her to stay. One evening, during a desert storm that rattled the windows and painted the sky with thunder, Zaid found her standing on the balcony, arms outstretched, face to the wind. He stepped beside her. "You're not afraid," he said quietly. She closed her eyes and let the wind rush through her fingers. Then she reached for her journal again. He thought she would write, but she didn't. Instead, for the first time since he'd known her, she spoke. Her voice was soft, hoarse, like a sound forced through rusted doors. "Fear," she said, "is not always the enemy." Zaid turned sharply, stunned. Emily looked at him, her eyes heavy with something ancient and unbroken. "Sometimes it protects us until we're ready." Then she stepped back inside, leaving him with the storm. And Zaid realized her silence hadn't been weakness. It had been armor, and she had just lowered it. For him, Zaid sat motionless in his office, the sand-colored walls of his villa glowing orange from the late afternoon sun. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was full of her voice. That one sentence. Fear is not always enemy. It echoed in his mind like an aftershock, shaking loose thoughts he had spent years keeping tightly controlled. Until that moment, Emily had been a mystery. Now she was something else entirely. Real, solid, human, not the silent shadow he bought in a moment of instinct, but a woman stepping carefully out of her own darkness. He hadn't seen her since the storm. She had vanished into a room after speaking, locking the door. No note, no word, no sound. That evening, he stood outside her door for what felt like hours. "Emily," he said softly, "can I ask something?" No response. "Is that your real name?" Still nothing. He turned to leave, but then heard the door click. She stood in the doorway, a soft white scarf wrapped around her shoulders, her expression unreadable. She opened her palm. In it, a folded piece of paper. He took it carefully and unfolded it. "No, that's the name they gave me." He looked up. "Do you remember your real name?" She nodded. "What is it?" She hesitated, then took the paper back, turned it over, and wrote a single word. "Ndoni." He said it out loud. "Ndoni." She nodded. "What does it mean?" She took the pen again. "Wild Rose. My grandmother named me." Zaid stared at the word. "Ndoni." There was something beautiful and fragile about it, like a secret protected through fire. "You don't have to use that name with me," he said gently. "But I will." She met his gaze, openly this time. Her eyes weren't defiant now. They were tired, grateful, almost tender. Days passed. Ndoni began speaking again little by little, not in conversation, not in confidence, but in fragments. Words whispered when she thought no one was listening. A thank you, spoken almost silently when he brought her new books. A greeting, so soft it could have been a breeze. Once she even laughed. It was low, guarded, but real. Zaid never pushed. He simply stayed near, present, letting her rebuild the pieces of herself in her own time. One night, she left a longer letter on his desk. It wasn't signed, but he knew it was hers by the shape of the words. "I was taken from my village when I was 14. My mother and sister were killed. My father was forced to leave us behind. They brought me across borders, sold me to men who locked me in rooms without windows. I stopped speaking the day I saw a girl killed for screaming. Silence became my way of surviving. I kept myself alive by becoming invisible." Zaid read the letter with shaking hands. He wanted to tear down walls, burn the world. But all he could do was fold the paper and press it to his chest. When he saw her that morning, she didn't hide. He simply said, "I'm sorry for everything you've endured." Ndoni looked at him for a long time, then said softly, "It wasn't your doing, but you stood in the same room as the men who allowed it. That matters." Zaid didn't argue. He knew she was right, and she was giving him something even in that truth. The next few weeks passed in strange harmony. Ndoni explored the villa like she was relearning the shape of her freedom. She played the piano in the library. She painted. She cooked meals from memory. She even smiled. Zaid kept his distance until the night she called his name. He had just returned from a business call in Cairo, exhausted. He entered the villa, dropped his keys, and froze. She stood in the corridor, waiting, in a deep blue robe that matched the color of the desert sky after sunset. "I made tea," she said. Her voice was stronger now. Zaid blinked. You spoke." She smiled faintly. "I've been practicing. When you're not here." He followed her into the courtyard, where a low table had been set under the stars. She poured the tea herself, rooibos with cardamom. They sat in silence, sipping. After a while, she asked, "Why did you come to that auction?" Zaid stared into his cup. "I didn't plan to. I was supposed to be in Senegal, closing a deal. But that morning I woke up and I couldn't breathe. Not from sickness. From something else. I felt like I was drowning in my own success." She watched him. "I grew up with everything. Wealth, education, connections. But I never had peace. I thought maybe helping people in secret, philanthropy, rescue, would make me feel human again. But it became a performance. Until I saw you." Her eyes softened. "I didn't buy you to own you, Ndoni. I bought you to stop something awful from happening. But what happened after, that was never part of the plan." She was quiet. Then she whispered, "I know." She reached across the table, slowly, and laid her fingers on his hand. Light as air, but more honest than any kiss. They didn't touch again that night, but something shifted between them. A door opened, not of desire, but of trust. The next day, Zaid called a lawyer in Nairobi. He arranged for official papers, identification, a new name if she wanted it, land in her name, freedom, not just in feeling but in law. He handed her the documents himself. "These are yours," he said. "I don't own you. No one does. You are free." She held the papers for a long time, then looked at him and said, "What if I choose to stay?" He didn't speak. He couldn't, because in that moment he realized he was the one who had been rescued. Zaid began waking earlier than usual, before the sun, before the bird song, before the world asked anything of him. And always, without fail, she was already awake. He'd find her in the garden, kneeling among the desert roses, her hands covered in dirt, her eyes closed like she was praying, not with words, but with presence. He didn't disturb her. He would only watch, silently, from a distance. The woman he once thought he was saving had become the most unshakable presence in his life, a constant rhythm. Her silence had faded into a quiet voice, used only when it mattered. She rarely laughed, but when she did, it was like wind passing through stone, soft, unexpected, and powerful enough to change the shape of everything around her. That morning, over breakfast, she asked something she never had before. "Can I show you where I was born?" Zaid looked up slowly. "You want to go back?" She nodded. "I need to. For me." He didn't ask questions. He only said, "Then we'll leave tomorrow." They flew by private jet into rural Tanzania, then drove for hours down red dirt roads. The further they traveled, the fewer words she spoke. Her body tensed. Her eyes grew guarded. Her fingers dug into the seatbelt across her chest. As the sun set, they arrived at what remained of a village. Crumbling walls, charred bricks, a few scattered chickens pecking at dry soil. Ndoni stepped out of the car, barefoot. She walked across the dirt, stopping near what looked like the bones of a house. "This was it," she said quietly. "That wall. That used to be our kitchen. My sister and I would make flatbread on a stone just there." Zaid remained a few feet behind her, letting her breathe in the memory. She crouched near a half-buried object. It was a broken cup. She picked it up slowly and whispered, "She had this in her hand when they came." Zaid stepped forward. "Your sister?" Ndoni nodded. "She was only 11. She screamed. They shot her first." Zaid's stomach turned. She continued, her voice trembling. "They told me to be quiet, that if I screamed, I would end up like her. I remember looking at her body. I remember feeling nothing. My silence didn't come from fear. It came from fury. If I opened my mouth, I would have cursed the world. So I shut it." He knelt beside her. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," he said. She turned to him with wet eyes. "You're here now." That night, they stayed in a small village lodge nearby. Simple clay walls, one shared room, a single candle flickering between them. They didn't speak. But as the wind blew through the small window and the scent of earth filled the room, Zaid saw her as she truly was, not fragile, not broken, but ancient. A woman who had carried her grief like armor. A survivor who had lived inside her silence for so long. She'd forgotten it wasn't a prison. It was a shield. And she was finally setting it down. They returned to Morocco 2 days later. But things were no longer the same. Ndoni began disappearing for hours at a time, leaving the villa without explanation. Sometimes she'd return with dust in her hair and scratches on her arms. Once with blood on her sleeve. Zaid asked nothing. Until the night she returned barefoot, limping slightly and with eyes like glass. "I need to tell you something," she said. They sat in the study. Her hands trembled. "I didn't just come back to remember," she whispered. "I came back to finish something." Zaid frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked down. "I found the man who led the raid on my village." Zaid's entire body stiffened. "You what?" "He's alive, living under a different name, running operations in northern Zambia." "Ndoni, you can't." "I'm not going to kill him," she said, cutting him off. "But I needed to see him, to know if I could face the monster and still walk away. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small photograph. It showed a man, older, with graying hair and empty eyes, standing in a crowded market. I followed him. I walked right past him. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? I was a child. Zaid stared at her. And what did you feel? She breathed out slowly. Nothing. Not rage. Not peace. Just release. Like the chain snapped. Zaid leaned forward. Ndoni, you could have been killed. I had to, she said. I had to see for myself that I wasn't afraid anymore. She looked up at him, her voice breaking. He doesn't know my story anymore. Zaid reached for her hand. I'm proud of you, he whispered. She broke down then, not violently, but quietly. Her tears slipped down without sound, her shoulders shaking with the weight of years. Zaid didn't move. He just held her hand. And in that moment, something passed between them, deeper than love, greater than desire. It was recognition of two people who had been living incomplete lives until they found each other. Later that night, Ndoni stood by his bedroom door. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't uncertain. She was calm. She crossed the room and sat beside him on the bed. Zaid, she said softly, I don't want to be your wound, or your guilt, or your salvation. He turned toward her, his throat tight. I don't want to be saved anymore, she continued. I want to live, and if you let me, I want to live beside you. Zaid reached up, brushing a tear from her cheek with the back of his hand. You already are. Zaid had built his empire on precision. Everything in his world, every contract, every investment, every conversation, followed a structure, predictable, calculated, controlled. But nothing about Ndoni followed that pattern. And yet, she fit into his life with an elegance that defied logic. She didn't disrupt his order. She made it feel alive. Her presence no longer unsettled him. It grounded him. Her voice, once rare, had become a quiet melody echoing through the villa. Still, Zaid had a secret. He had kept it locked inside a private vault for years. And that morning, as Ndoni poured tea for them both, her touch gentle and her smile small, but real, he knew he couldn't keep it hidden much longer. I have to travel to Doha, he told her. 3 days. High-level summit with energy ministers. I'll be back before Friday. She nodded, understanding. Should I stay here? He hesitated. You could come. She looked out the window. No, she said quietly. I think I'll stay. I'm not ready for the world yet. Zaid respected that. He left that night. The jet lifted into black sky, and with it came a familiar tightness in his chest. But it wasn't about business this time. It was something deeper, a fear he couldn't name. Ndoni remained in the villa, alone but not lost. She spent the days walking barefoot through quiet halls, her fingers brushing the stone walls, her voice humming low songs from childhood. But on the second evening, she heard something. Footsteps, not Zaid's. Heavier, faster. She turned just as the front door crashed open. 3 men stormed into the main hall, faces covered, armed. One of them grabbed her by the arm before she could run. She fought back, teeth clenched, fury rising. But they overpowered her quickly. The leader stepped forward, pulling down his scarf. He was Arab, maybe in his 50s. Sharp eyes. Cold. You're the woman, he said, inspecting her. The one he brought home like a pet. She glared at him, silent. You don't know who he is, do you? The man continued. You don't know what your Prince Charming has done. She didn't flinch. He destroyed families like mine, the man sneered. While building his empire, Zaid buried people under concrete. Mines, oil rigs, promises. My brother died in one of his developments in Chad, collapsed under faulty scaffolding. Covered up, paid off, we were left with silence. Ndoni tried to speak, but the man grabbed her by the jaw. I lost my brother, he hissed. Now he loses something too. He motioned to his men. Take her. They dragged her through the courtyard, into a van. The gates opened with a code the intruders already knew. By the time the police were alerted, the vehicle was gone. Zaid received the call halfway, through a gala dinner with ministers from Saudi and Qatar. He didn't wait for dessert. By the time his jet touched down in Morocco, it was 3 a.m. The villa was surrounded by authorities. His staff was shaken. One of his guards had been injured in the ambush, but all he cared about was one question. Where is she? No one could answer. The cameras had been disabled. No ransom call had come. Just silence. Zaid locked himself in his study and stared at her last journal entry, left open on his desk. It read, "I'm no longer afraid of the dark, because I've lived in it, and I know what light feels like now." He closed the book, set his hands on the desk, and whispered to no one, "I swear I'll find you." Ndoni was held in a remote compound in the high Atlas Mountains, cold stone, iron gates, and silence. Her captors fed her, but never spoke. Only the older man, the leader, visited her cell daily. He wanted her to turn against Zaid. He showed her news clippings, reports, investigations buried over the years, corruption, bribery, industrial accidents, environmental destruction. Zaid's name was in all of them. "He is not who you think," the man insisted. "He buys silence." But Ndoni didn't speak, until one morning when a man asked, "Tell me, what did he promise you? Freedom? Love?" She looked him in the eye and said, "He never promised me anything." The man was taken aback. "Then why stay with him?" Ndoni's voice was steady. "Because he didn't treat me like something to be fixed or owned. He listened. And when I gave him silence, he gave me patience. When I gave him fear, he gave me space." She leaned forward, and when I finally gave him my story, he didn't run. The man stared at her. Something in his expression wavered, but it didn't last. "You're blinded," he said, "and you'll die in the dark." He turned and left. Zaid worked without sleeping. He hired a team of mercenaries, private investigators, ex-intelligence officers. Everyone on his payroll had one mission: bring her back. The break came from a former bodyguard who recognized the scarred leader on a blurry security image. His name was Khalil Haddad, ex-contractor, known extremist, had disappeared after accusing Zaid's firm of killing his brother. The location was traced. A strike was prepared. Zaid demanded to go with them. "No," his head of security insisted. "It's not safe." "I'm not asking." Zaid said, "I'm going." The night they reached the compound, snow was falling. Thin, sharp flakes dancing like ghosts through the wind. Zaid stood behind the strike team, heart pounding. He had seen war zones before. This was different. This was personal. The raid lasted 8 minutes. 2 men were captured. 1 fled. Ndoni was found locked in a stone cell, wrapped in blankets, eyes alert. When the door opened and she saw Zaid, she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just ran to him. He caught her in his arms, lifting her off the floor, holding her like something sacred. "I told you I'd find you," he whispered. She pressed her forehead to his chest. "I knew you would." 3 months had passed since the raid in the Atlas Mountains. The scars on Ndoni's wrists had faded, but the memories lingered like smoke, thick in the air, clinging to everything even after the fire was gone. But now, she was no longer afraid of fire. She had survived worse. Zaid had turned the villa into something else entirely. It was no longer a cage gilded in silence. It was a sanctuary, a place where her name, Ndoni, was spoken with reverence, where her voice was not demanded, but invited, and most of all, where she had space to choose what came next. And for the first time in her life, she was choosing. She rose each day before the sun, tended the garden, wrote in her journal, helped the staff cook, and often disappeared for hours into nearby towns to volunteer at refugee shelters. Quietly, anonymously, Zaid never asked where she went. He just made sure she returned safe. He had changed too. The executive who once ruled empires with a glance now spent long evenings barefoot in the courtyard, listening to the wind. He withdrew from half his business interests, sold off companies he no longer believed in, and reinvested in clean energy, education, and rebuilding communities across Africa and the Middle East. And when asked why, by his board, by the media, by allies, he simply said, "I found something worth more than legacy. I found peace." But peace, Zaid knew, wasn't a still lake. It was a choice to keep walking toward the light, even when shadows lingered at your back. One evening, after dinner, Ndoni stood on the edge of the terrace overlooking the dunes, her dress fluttering around her legs like silk smoke. Zaid joined her, silent. She didn't turn, but she spoke. "I'm going to leave," she said. His heart clenched, but he didn't move. "Not forever," she added. "But I need to find the pieces of myself that still live elsewhere. I want to return to the places where I stopped being a person, and reclaim them, step by step." Zaid took a deep breath. "Will you go alone?" She nodded. "It's something I have to do by myself. Not because I don't trust you, but because I trust me now." He stepped closer. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Not your presence. Not your gratitude." "I know," she said. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then she turned to face him. "But what I want to give you is this." She reached into the folds of her shawl and handed him a small velvet box. He opened it slowly. Inside was a simple silver ring, engraved with a symbol, a wild rose. "This is not a promise," she whispered. "It's a memory of what you gave me when the world had taken everything." Zaid's eyes shimmered. "And what did I give you?" She stepped close enough to place a hand over his heart. "You didn't save me, Zaid. You saw me. And in this life, that's the rarest kind of love." Tears filled his eyes, not from sadness, but from a weight of everything unspoken finally finding air. "When will I see you again?" he asked, his voice raw. Ndoni leaned up and kissed his cheek. "When I no longer feel like a story someone else tried to write." She left the next morning. No guards, no farewell parade, just a letter folded neatly on his pillow. Asterisk, we are not the names they gave us. We are not the chains they wrapped around our bodies. We are not the silence they demanded. We are memory. We are fire. We are still here. Asterisk. 2 years later, in a coastal village in Mozambique, a group of children laughed as a woman read them stories under a tree. She had radiant skin, coiled hair, and a calm strength that made others quiet when she entered a room. Her name was Ndoni, not Amelie, not the girl from the auction, just Ndoni, the woman who wrote her own ending. And in another part of the world, somewhere between desert and sea, Zaid al-Hakim sat beside a well that now brought clean water to thousands. He wore no suit, just sand-colored clothes, hands calloused from work, and around his finger, the silver ring remained, the wild rose, because some people aren't meant to be owned. Some are meant to bloom. And to bloom, sometimes you must first burn